Kank kank.
Kank.
Kank kank.
Kank.
Yo, we're back in the building. We're back in effect. Hello. Oh, hold on, I gotta do it. The dog doesn't like my intro. Sorry, guys. All right, you guys ready for it? Well, hello. And welcome all and sundry back to Pencil, your favorite pandemic podcast, brought to you by the internets. And remember, you guys, the internet is not a large truck; it is a series of tubes. And let's get this stuff off the screen. Where's our names? I'm so out of practice, you guys. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while.
Yeah, I was trying to think. When was it? April? May?
I think it might have been April or May. I think that might have been it. Let me do some intros real quick. Welcome, guys, back to the podcast. This is a hopefully weekly podcast that'll be coming to you every Wednesday live.
Every May.
Every May at 8 p.m. EST. I am your first host, Philadelphia's favorite son, and also, what's my nickname tonight? Jean-Luc Picard, the captain of this ship. Engage. Well, hello. Welcome back. And also, I am joined by my co-host. You know him. To know him is to love him. Stone Cold Steve CONLEY.
Some fire going off behind.
I really need I need to add some special effects to this.
You need no shirt and a leather vest. That's what you need.
Next week.
Steve, how are you, sir?
Fantastic. It's good to be back. It's good to see you guys.
Oh, that's great. And I would be remiss if I did not introduce our best bud, co-host, and Master Chief of Comics, Mike Manley. Hello, Mike. Ultraman. I love it. Didn't Ultraman make, like, when he did there were, like, I started watching the old original Ultramans. Ultramanses. What's the plural of Ultramans?
Ultras Men.
Ultras Men. There you go. And Mike, you remember this? I copped the complete series DVD set off of Amazon for $9 a couple of years back. I think I got you one too. It was so cheap. I was just like handing them out like they were
giving them to random people on the street.
It was like Halloween candy. And there's so many. The sound effects are so weird in that show. It's because there's lots of weird like zooming. But he goes like ha. There's like lots of ha. Yeah. I don't know what those effects were for, but
to enhance. If you just do this,
right?
It's not like yeah. It's better if you do that than you just like me. Oh, come here, monster.
Was it like Shuat? Was that one that was the?
Oh, was there an actual sound effect?
I seem to remember someone telling me that was the they kept saying it like it was a
sriracha, like
sriracha. I think it was sriracha. That's where they get the name.
Spicy mayo.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, hi guys, how's everybody? It's good to see our penciliers back. The keeper of the records, Notorious JRD, says late May when Gallagher had to reschedule. Thank you, JRD. And also, we got to bring John on. I did talk to Gallagher a little while ago. And he was like, John Gallagher. If he was from Philly, I would call him John Gallagher. And he said he was more than willing to come back on. So that's fantastic.
Well, he is he?
Hello, everybody. So just hey, what up, Ronaldo? It's good to be back in the chair. We've been away for a while for a myriad of reasons, but restarting the engines are always a little hard, knocking some of the rust off. I would also like to say, if you haven't been watching it, Steve CONLEY's foray into streaming has been fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
And sculpting.
And streaming and sculpting in the stream. That's right. Steve, can you tell us a little bit about your lives and like how they're set up and what you do? Because I think we need to celebrate you.
Oh, that's very nice. Well, if folks don't know who I am, my name's Steve Conley. Apart from being one of the Tres Amigos here, I am a web cartoonist of the webcomic The Middle Age, and it's free on Webtoons, Tapas, Go Comics, and middleagecomic.com. And I also do some 3D sculpting. I've been teaching myself. I've had webcomics. I've drawn comic books for years, but I always wanted merch. Always wanted more stuff to sell, and I always wanted minis or action figures. I think that's kind of a dream of people who create their own independent comics, is they want to, I don't know, it's something about the thing you created in one medium bleeding into another medium that somehow gives it more, I don't know, more dimensionality in some way. I mean, literally it's 3D, but it's also it's just existing in more places, and it feels like it's getting more of a foothold into reality. It's becoming more real in some way. And so I started sculpting. And so if you check out my channel on Twitch, it's twitch.tv/Steve Conley. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I stream from 4 to 8 p.m. East Coast time, usually sculpting. And sculpting on my iPad, Nomad Pro, making at least the first foray has been into minis. Dungeons and Dragons.
Look at that.
Let me give you a little backdrop here that'll hopefully fix the.
Whoop, no, there you go. Yeah, that's crazy.
So there was a Kickstarter to make these. They were all sculpted on an iPad, and so we just wrapped up a Kickstarter to make them, and yeah, it went great. It went great.
And what was the Kickstarter for?
It was to get a casting company to pay for a casting company to make more of them. Like, I could just distribute the digital files, but they're fairly complicated with all the arrows sticking out of that character, and there's an axe in his back. And most minis, most Dungeons and Dragons, Warhammer, tabletop miniatures are essentially very flat. They're designed to work with the mold. These characters I really didn't design them like I knew what I was doing, because I didn't. They're very three-dimensional. They're very leaning forward, and there's a lot of stuff sticking out. And the first casting company I talked to looked at them and said, "Oh, we can't do anything with this. This is like, well, we have to pull all the arrows out to start with. You can't have that." And the next company I talked to said, "Oh, well, we'll make them little kits, like tiny model kits." I'm like, "You do that?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, we do it. That's how we do most of them." So they talked me into keeping them complicated, and that's why I needed to have the Kickstarter to, there needs to be a master cast made, and these people make like 3D prints that are the same thing. If you have to get like a crown made nowadays, they 3D print those, and they just use really high-end machines, and they have to be perfect to the, not the micron, but very small. And
it's hard getting it in your mouth, though.
I've swallowed a couple, but they do a great job of super detail, and so it's great. They're a wonderful company. So the Kickstarter was to make them, and I'm in the middle of collecting information from all the kind backers now to place the order to fulfill them all. And you guys know how that part of Kickstarter goes. It's
you also were doing it because you were making a module, right? You were going to make a module.
Yeah, because I'm a lifelong nerd, gaming nerd, and playing D&D back in the day with the red boxes and the blue boxes. Not all the way back to the beginning, but pretty close. And started playing more D&D during the pandemic. And there's a huge overlap between the comic fans and the D&D nerds. It was all part of the same. We went to the spinner rack. We went to the gaming store. We went to all the bookstores had a gaming section back then, and they also had like it was just great. It was just a wonderful little time.
Well, one of the big the big showcase, one of the big chain stores around here used to have a place in the mall, and like half the store was gaming.
Yeah.
And you'd have like things on Saturday. I would always see kids in there playing, and you'd have.
And I think the bookstores now still have like now you go into Barnes and Noble, and it's mostly games and mugs until you get to see the 3 or 4 books they have. But gaming books still sell. They're really popular on Kickstarter, and I'm a big old nerd, so
I think there was maybe I'm wrong, because maybe it's generational, but I thought there was like gaming people, like, because when I was in high school, I only played Dungeons and Dragons like once or twice.
It didn't stick to you.
Well, yeah, because I wasn't really sure like how it worked, and the people playing with. It was like, okay, this seems kind of like, I don't know.
Right.
I figure out all that stuff and everything.
It's a lot of math.
Yeah, well, building your character and then like knowing what the roles are, and then a lot of it has to do with your dungeon master.
Mm-hmm.
Does he make it
The community.
interesting? Is he interesting? Can he make an interesting tale?
Mm-hmm.
But so I tried it a couple times in high school and it didn't stick. But it seemed like there were people who were like into that, but it was kind of like Star Trek, where like it was like a fandom that was sort of, seemed to me anyway, to be separate from comic fans.
Sure.
Although there might have been some comic fans that liked both, most of the people I knew that liked comics didn't also play Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting Venn diagram. It doesn't always overlap.
No.
Right.
No.
And I mean, that kind of makes me think about how a lot of comic book fans also like pro wrestling. Right?
Sure.
Like, there's something interesting there.
That 80s period where you had like the WWF pre-WWE group and the comic books being a big deal and the independent comics just coming in, the Turtles and all that, and D&D hitting all at the same, roughly. It's like a really concentrated period that is, was huge in a lot of our lives. And then the artwork from D&D was very comic booky. The Jeff Dees, Bill Willingham, Errol Otis, all those characters, all these artists are fantastic.
Yeah.
Wrestling was like every week it was like a comic book. They would have the villains, and they're making their monologuing about what they're going to do, and
they had their superpower, the sleeper hold, or the figure 4 leg lock. Yeah,
right. That was like 3 or 4. Well, I guess the late 70s and the early 80s, which would have been when you guys were would have been prime for you guys as kids. It was a little bit past my wrestling, because my wrestling was like
Haystacks Calhoun.
Right. And all those guys are like Dick the Bruiser and those guys from like the late 60s, early 70s. It was not glamorous. There were no flames.
Right.
There was no parting of the shiny shawl when they came out, or curtain, or anything like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I'm the wrestling guy here. I don't know if Steve's into it, but there's a very interesting mark in the ley line of pro wrestling, how the pomp and circumstance wasn't really there until Gorgeous George, who was like the first flamboyant wrestler, came out, and he had somebody like spraying perfume into the crowd, and he did all that, and they hated him. It was perfect.
Wasn't that Ravishing Reynolds or whatever?
Yeah, I think that was the Gorgeous George. Like, they were taking shots at him on the Bugs Bunny cartoon. And then kind of more of the pageantry came into pro wrestling. But yeah, with the D&D stuff, I think that it really depends on who you like Mike said, who you were with, what kind of crowd you were around, how ostracized it was in your area, because something that's kind of come up in the resurgence of D&D and Stranger Things and all that, is that there was a really strong panic part of D&D in the early 80s where people thought it was satanic, and that was real shit.
If only that worked. Don't you think the U.S. military would have been playing Dungeons and Dragons to take over the world? Come on.
It's like, I don't want my kid in the basement casting spells unless it's to pay the water bill.
That's right. If the 5-star generals could have been rolling some dice,
So, but now it's really interesting to see all this stuff kind of come to such a head, and it's having these resources like we do, like what Steve is doing on a daily basis on his iPad, still blows my mind that you could even do that. You can render something and turn it.
Well, tech has gotten to the point where you don't really have to know how anything is done. You can you don't have to know what the program does. You just have to be able to work with it. That's where we are. Like it's you don't have to see behind the screen, like in the beginning of the internet where you could hack HTML. You know what I mean? You could hack your code. You don't really have to do that with a lot of technology now. The technology is,
more user friendly. Is that what you're saying, Mike?
Yeah. I mean, we're in a weird time, because I think because of that, it sort of removes the mystery of things and the struggle of things, which I think is that's an important part of art. I know we talked about this before, but when you're in art school and you have to build a canvas, let's say, you got to go buy it, nail it together, stretch your stuff, however you're going to prime it. And then if you do it wrong, you just wasted $50. You know what I mean? And now you have this technology where you don't have to worry about if you've got your iPad. You know what I mean? It's like you don't have to worry about that part of like doing something physically and making a mistake. And then it's like, oh, I got to go back to Home Depot
and buy another can.
Yeah,
Now,
I mean, all digital arts had that benefit of not having to worry about the physical limitations. I mean, I can erase indefinitely on my iPad and never worry about the paper falling apart, or will the ink hold if I erase it too many times, or but then I'm sure there were people who were like looking at you buying your canvas and you didn't even go out and kill the animal before you got that material. Like you're missing out on the whole part of
right.
You didn't crush your own dyes to make your pigments. You bought it in the tube.
We had a class called Materials and Techniques, which was very interesting. Because the first thing you did was you built your canvas, and then you actually got your little pot of boiling water, and you put your rabbit skin glue in, and you primed your canvas just like Raphael. It was really interesting, just because you understood this whole process. And part of being an artist was also being a craftsman. Right. And knowing how to do all these other things, right? Like when you were an assistant, you also had to go down to the store and pick the pigment. Like go down and don't go to this guy, go to this guy, because his blue is bullshit and it fades. You know what I mean? And now we can do all this stuff. Like you can sculpt something or you can paint something. And it's you don't have all that, 4 days of trying to find the right ingredients to make your thing.
Sure.
It reminds me of when I was at University of the Arts in 1990, 91. I remember the great placa shortage of 91, where you could not find a bottle of black placa ink anywhere in the state. But you know what? I think this is an interesting thing that we can kind of hang our hat on for a little bit. And I was going to defend Steve Conley. He doesn't need my help. But my one question I was going to ask you, Steve, but I'll put JRD's thing up first, is what did you find out, or what did you learn from digging into that sculpting program that you may have not known before you started? Like even about turning things in a physical 3D space.
It solved some compositional problems and character design problems I was running into with characters from my webcomic. So if people don't know my webcomic, it's called The Middle Age. It's a fantasy comic. It's been going on for 6 years. So it's dovetailing nicely into the resurgence of D&D. So there's all these fans who are coming back to fantasy, coming back to Rankin Bass Hobbit. And here's my webcomic. And it's nice that I've got this thing. So my first sculpts were all of these characters from my webcomic. So they were characters who were already really fully formed in my head. I've drawn them from every angle. It was like, as a cartoonist, I felt like going into 3D, I felt like we have an advantage because we've drawn hands. We're not afraid to draw hands. I mean, some of us are reluctant to draw them, but we've drawn enough hands where it's like we know. How about this? We know what a correct hand looks like.
Yes,
and not just on the instinctive level where we're like uncanny valley, not uncanny valley. It's more like that thumbs off. That we have a sense of the specifics, and so when we go into a 3D program to make a hand, and yes, it's daunting, because I'm building it one knuckle at a time. But you get a sense of, I felt like I was going there knowing quite a bit. And even though I didn't know the program, and I will say the program is forgiving. It has 1,000 levels of undo. You can say, it's like in video game terminology, you can have a save point and go, or in coding terms, we're going to, what is it? They splinter off the production in a new direction. So save the file here. I'm going to try something pretty weird. Save the file, create a new file, and start working on it. Again, stuff that traditional artists would kill for. And in sharing my work on Reddit in some of the digital sculpting forums, you definitely get a sense of the people who work practically with paint, with clay, that they're like, am I really sculpting? Everything I'm doing is 2D. pretending to be 3D.
You're faking 3D on a 2D, right? That's interesting.
My tablet is this thick. It's never going to dry out. The clay's never going to be too wet or too dry. It's not going to crack. But I can pinch and zoom, and my old eyes like that. So if it is, assisting me, and that I can zoom in indefinitely and I can zoom out, the iPad I love because
that's cheating.
Maybe to some. Is it as far as Midjourney and AI created artwork? I don't know. I don't think so, but it's still me.
Still choices. I mean, even when you were the Midjourney thing, like you were talking about the other day, that's still choices, right?
But they're prompts. They're more prompts. It's not like it's more like that. It's comparing it to, if people don't know what Midjourney is, it's this class of AI created artwork where you say, I want a warrior on a mountaintop with a blue sky holding a battle axe drawn in the style of Frank Frazetta. You add just a ton of instructions and the computer generates something. It does its best. And some of them are very striking. And there are a few Kickstarters running now, and all the artwork was created that way. It's clear it has a style, because I suspect that the AI is not only learning the factors that create these things, like what defines. I saw a great video from Vox. People should check it out on YouTube. How the metrics are, how the computer can tell the difference between a banana and a balloon, for instance. And it really is, they are defined by their differences, and everything is defined by its differences in context of where it is. Very Wittgensteinian. And so you've got this program, and I think it's also learning what people like, because people are following down rabbit holes, and I think it's generating a style. And I see that style. It's very prominent. And it's very weird, though, because it's kind of the Marvel method. It was Stan Lee, who never drew a thing, but he gave Jack Kirby a prompt, the Fantastic Four meet God. And right. Jack Kirby would come back later on, and Stan would do his best with what he got.
So is this new stuff we're talking about in the same camp as those robot dogs with rifles on their backs? Is that the same thing we're talking about? I think they're all leading to the same place. I think in the timeline.
It is a little dystopian. I think we cartoonists have so far. You can also tell that the computer can't quite get eyes right.
The eyes are dead.
Nostrils are a little off.
Yeah.
There's wonkiness to it all, but it'll fix all that. But I don't think it'll be good at. The interesting thing about it is, if I give it a set of prompts, and Mike gives it a set, and Jamar gives it a set, we'll all get different results because the AI is generating it randomly. So I don't think it could do continuity. I don't think you could say, give me,
2 weeks of the Phantom. Is that it?
Yeah. Or Leon in this situation, and Leon in the next situation,
right?
He wouldn't know what to do.
I want
Leon the professional.
Yeah, I want the next Leon graphic novel, 400 pages. I need it Monday. Bye. You hop in your sports car and zoom away to your penthouse.
I'm trying not to be. I joked online that it was going to be next time I go to Comic-Con, I'll be setting up and there'll be a print wall and it'll all be artwork created by the AI, and that's how angry it's going to make me.
Yeah.
But then it will make people who do it by hand even more special, because it basically becomes like it's good enough, but it's the same issue people are going to face, which is, technology is only as good as, like, a computer can only give you back what you're feeding it. So the AI will continue to learn, but of course it's like Photoshop. It was mostly, a lot of things are designed by engineers. Right. They're not oil painters. They're not people working with pen and ink. So they make something that's approximating pen and ink. But anybody who uses a pen and ink will, I use it every day working in Clip Studio. It's nothing like a Hunt 108 on a piece of really good. You know what I mean?
But interestingly, the tools in Photoshop are all pretending to be natural tools. There's an airbrush tool, there's a brush tool, there's a pencil tool. It's not like there's not a pixel tool and a vignette. I mean, it's all real world analogs. So having those skills absolutely applies digitally, but digitally has always been a pale imitation of the real thing. I think what would be
this is not a G pen. However you say that in French.
Well, what I liked, there was a shirt that I saw, I guess was very popular at San Diego Comic-Con, which was, it was like writer, penciler, inker, colorist, letterer, you know, and writer and
yeah.
so the idea of this AI thing, it's like none of the above. It's very interesting that you're not any of those things. You're creating artwork without being the writer, penciler, inker, colorer, letterer. None of that. I don't know. So, but there's pride that you get from doing all those things, and that's what I love about that shirt. I do that.
Yeah.
You know what? Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say I would be interested to see. I think it's one thing Photoshop a bunch of photo batch shit together, and it looks like a really bad cover for a paperback, you know, and you know, you got a submarine and a blimp burning, and you know, some face or whatever. I want to see it make a comic strip. I want to see it do a drawing, a pen and ink drawing. Say, I want to see 6 pages of the Fantastic Four in the style of Jack Kirby, and it can sit down and go explode, and just you know. I think some things it will be good at, like the fantasy kind of things, where you're not really judging it against real stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you said I wanted to look like a Robert McGinnis painting of a guy on a horse, and I can't see it coming up with very specific things. I think it's really good at the fantasy, weird bridge, hobgoblin world, you know, where it stuff mushes into each other, but it's not going to be James Bond.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you check out that Vox video, they have part of the interview includes James Gurney of Dinotopia. Was
Dinotopia, right?
Yeah. And apparently his style was very popular with the early AI. People would say James Gurney style. And he makes the case saying, listen, if you're going to be importing me as a reference for your work, what does that mean? And can I opt out? And he was a big proponent of it early on. But
I wanted the computer copying my pictures,
because that's what it's doing. It's scraping the internet and using all those alt tags we put in images and all the AI identifications, like lovely Facebook and Google, where algorithms be upon them, where they take a look at it. They can clearly identify a face versus not a face, or like on an iPad now, if there's an image it has text in it. If I click on the image, it will look up the word that it's reading. It'll identify that there's a word in that picture. And so all that stuff is contributing to the AI learning.
How do you guys feel about, and there's some questions that are populating the chat I'm going to get to in a second, but how do you guys feel about, just before all this stuff started to happen, even just kind of like this really slow push against the wall of kind of like automating art? And what I'm thinking about is, which was popular for a hot second on Facebook, when you could cartoonify yourself or illustratify yourself.
Sure.
And, rather than your normal like duck lip photo of some lady, now it looks like,
duck lip with a little line around it.
Yeah, like the take on me duck lips.
It was slightly better than the oil filter effect in Photoshop, or the pastel filter in Photoshop.
I don't worry about that, because I think that no matter what, it's like it'll be an imitation of Van Gogh, but it's never going to be Van Gogh. It's going to be an imitation of Frazetta, but it's never going to be Frazetta, right? So it's only going to be, it's just like when people copy someone, right? Like they copy Jack Kirby, or you copy Frazetta, or you copy Neil Adams, or you copy any well-known artist. What you tend to do is you tend to exaggerate what were certain stylistic things in their style. You Kirby more than Kirby, right? Frazetta more than Frazetta. You crosshatch cheekbones more than Neil Adams. It almost becomes like a caricature in a way of that person's style. So, but it's not that person innovating, right? It's like, okay, I'm a big Jack Kirby fan, or I'm a big Neil Adams fan. And when I was a teenager, you would look at their comics and you would kind of copy, or you'd have them there as like a reference so you could do what they did. But that's not what they were doing.
Right.
It's like that world is closed. So it's like there's only so many possibilities if you live in that person's established work, because that person is out there going beyond their established work, or should be when they were, when really kick it, right? It's like if you look at Frazetta up to like 1974, 75, he's a very different Frazetta than post 75 when the books came out. His work was never as good. He was always good, but it was never as reaching, I don't think. Everybody, a lot of artists have that sort of sweet spot. So I think if you're just referencing James Gurney, you're going to have 900 James Gurney paintings, and everything is going to be like, well, I got that arm from that painting, and I got that background, or I got that palette from that painting. And it's sort of like limiting, because is the AI going to be educated to the point, like, who makes the AI? What is the process of the AI?
Right.
Who watches The Watchmen, Mike Manley?
Exactly. Like, what is the process of the AI being able to go, that's Herb Trimpe.
Right. Well, that's really what again, check out that Vox thing. They go into detail and actually use some nice explanations of, like, basically the diagram of something that, okay, again, they compare, simplify it down, a banana versus a balloon, and the balloon's red, the banana's yellow. But what happens if the balloon's yellow? So the yellowness no longer becomes a distinction for the banana versus the balloon, and you have to have another factor. So it's the shape. But what if there's what about balloons that are shaped like alphabet letters? And so the computer has to keep making comparisons at multidimensional slides as to what defines a thing. So if you're able to tell Trimpe from somebody else, eventually the computer will be able to as well. Whatever it is that you say, that's Trimpiness, that's Kirbiness.
I was gonna do the uniblab, like the ticket spitting out of its mouth.
But so whatever that defining quality is, the James Gurneyness of it all, they're like saying they're not just, it's not just scrapbooking. It really is more than that. It's really it's curious to see where this goes. But my real concern about it all is that it's going to undercut some income for the aspiring creators who are just getting off the ground. Because if you could get, people would accept work that was unprofessional of a certain type. This AI will create work that's unprofessional, but it's got a finish to it that I think might hurt younger creators.
Here's my thing. I don't think it's that serious. I don't think it's that deep. And the reason I'm saying that is, like, we went through that very weird clip art renaissance.
In the 80s and 90s, that was big.
You know, you remember you had your copy of Print, what was this shit? Print Shop?
Yeah.
Broderbud Print Shop Pro, or whatever that was. Claris Works. I'm going back into the time machine. You know, or you had the finger that had the ticket in it that says exit, you know, or like the guy with the pipe.
Sure.
And like all of that stuff. And I remember some of our cartooning friends were making bank in the late 90s creating clip art.
Bob Saki, and there was a whole bunch of people that were doing that kind of art stuff.
Right.
And I remember that being a discussion at the time, like, well, wait a minute now. If you sit there and you make 900 images and you put them on a disc, you know.
And some of us had those discs.
Right. And then eventually, you know, people hack those discs, just like the early Photoshops, right? So you're not buying it. You're getting it from your buddy, you know what I mean? It just keeps like lowering the return.
Right.
But what that does, I mean, you're right, Steve. It might hurt some lower level artists, but then you just have to not suck. I mean, if you suck,
but
right,
and that's I aspire
Right.
to not suck, but but I think there's a period where you're going to, and I feel like what this means is the stuff that the AI is good at, artists are gonna have to fill the other areas. You know what I mean? Because if you can get an AI to give it to you for free or for $10, it's hard to compare that to paying $1,000 to somebody else to do an oil painting. It's just hard.
Yeah, I mean, I somehow don't see it being something that will tear the roof off of the business, because there's always some boogeyman. There's always some thing that artists are facing. Like, oh, the inkers are going to go away because of digital inking, or there's always something that's rearing its head. It's going to be the end. That's going to. And I think when I'm drawing something like today, I was working on one of the strips. The variety of things that I'm pulling from and how that I'm mixing them together and judging them, I don't think any computer can compete with that. I think a computer can do a good job of, like I said, taking all the James Gurney stuff and all the Boris stuff and cutting it up. But then I'm thinking like, oh, but this part of the lighting of the space is like Wally Wood, or this other thing, look, I saw a photograph of this. Or I'm pulling from such divergent sources more than a computer. Also, coupled with my continual judgment as I'm working. And I don't believe a person or a computer, even though it has all these parameters, will never quite be equal to that. Like they might get to the point where it can reprint, it can imitate a Rembrandt. You know what I mean? Like, but that's just like one sort of like limited thing, or it can do a Van Gogh or a Gauguin, or something that's very super stylized and well known. It might be able to do a Mona Lisa or something like that, but I don't know. That's kind of like it's like a card trick. I don't think that it's ever going to. No one's ever going to pay $80 million for something that an AI makes.
Oh, it's interesting. Well, yeah, I agree. I'm not trying to be like, it's the end of the world. I tend not to be that about any of the things that happen. I just think that this is really, I'm so impressed by what the AI is doing that I feel like it's definitely going to change. Everybody was making money off of ebook covers on Amazon because the work looks really good at the Amazon thumbnail size. If you blow it up, all of a sudden, wait, is that arm becoming a sleeve and going back into it, becoming a hammer? What's going on there? It doesn't stand up to scrutiny right now, but as a small size, it's striking. And I think it's going to affect some younger freelancers. The Fiverr crowd who produce covers for people they're going to have trouble.
Let's change gears for a second. We kind of like caught the lightning for a minute there talking about this AI stuff. Our good buddy Ronaldo, this is for you, Steve, asks, Steve, going back to your campaign for your middle-aged minis, Steve, will you use the minis to act out scenes before drawing them? That's interesting.
No, but I did learn a lot by making the minis. Touching back on one of the questions, I do take him to the tub with me. But,
pew pew.
But I didn't quite. There was a character. There's these baby dragons in the story, and I didn't quite have them fully formed in my head as I was working on them. I knew from one angle, from another angle, but certain angles in the middle, they always kind of fell apart, and I would revert to the 3/4 view or the side view or something like that. They had some stock poses that I was comfortable with. I thought they looked best, and I really didn't figure them out until I made the model. So now I left creating that model with a better understanding of the character. And so I think that was very helpful.
Which is interesting because if you think about it, there's certain characters that are graphics, right? They're graphic, very flat. Mickey Mouse. But then you see sculptures of Mickey Mouse, so they had to figure out some way of making his ears work. Right. Because one of the things, if you see a model sheet of Mickey Mouse, they have like the don't pose, like never draw him from
Right.
this angle, right?
Right.
It does is like it looks confusing or it looks weird. Or
Never draw him with a Newport hanging out of his.
or like the Peanuts characters, right?
Yeah.
Right now, you will actually see a sculpture of a Peanuts character, but like Snoopy sitting on his doghouse. We talked about that before. I mean, his doghouse is like this. It's like a
Right.
pyramid, right? Like
Yeah.
so, he's somehow laying right on the peak, unless there's a flat part of the roof, which we never see. Right. If you were going to now sculpt Snoopy sitting on top of his dog,
You have to resolve those things. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like Popeye, or I mean, there's just so many of the old cartoon characters. Or like Dexter's Lab. He's completely flat. He's like a decal. In fact, it reminds me when you would see those Viewmasters.
Mm-hmm.
And they would do like the Flintstones or whatever, and they would actually be in 3D, and they had to resolve.
Right.
Because you're right, it looks good in this angle, and then when you turn it, it's like, oh, well, what happens to Fred's hair, right?
Were there a bunch of like frozen frames, like in between shots in animation that people would just put online of like Homer from this angle, and he'd look weird. He'd look really weird. And it had to be before they made the action figure where you could look at it and go, oh, I know what he looks like from this angle now.
Right. I just had this weird flashback. I remember the Viewmaster reels where you would like, and you put these. There were like, you've never seen it. There's discs, almost like carousel slide.
Yeah.
And you put them in, and you would like advance the frames, looking into a light. But do you guys remember there was one, but it had a crank? It was like an animation.
I had that.
I do.
What was it called?
It was Play School.
Yes.
And they had little films that you could stick in. And I remember being super fascinated with that. But one was
I had Pinocchio.
Donald, Mickey, and Goofy with like the ghosts.
With the ghosts. That's the one I had. Yeah.
And there's a scene where like Goofy's looking back and he thinks it's a ghost, but it's like his own butt, and he like jabs it with a needle.
Yeah. And you could run it back too. You could run it back.
Yeah, you can run it back. Yeah.
I learned a lot about animation from watching, although I think there was a few frames. It wasn't like on ones, it was on twos or something like that.
It was what's eight.
I loved that. Watching it over and over and over again.
Yeah, I had Pinocchio. And
wow.
It was just fantastic. But I remember I kept running back the
kind of whale going into the water.
And what was it, like the Blue Angel or whatever, like the little like fairy light appears in the studio, and I was just fascinated with that. Mike, here's a question for you. Thanks, Ronaldo. JRD asks, Mike, you've talked about the amount of photo reference you use for the Phantom. Again, congrats on your 7 years on the strip. Do you prefer stories where you can play with designs or stories more rooted in realism? Thank you, Jared.
It really just depends upon the story. I mean, there's certain. I mean, on the Phantom, if I'm drawing a gun, I'm having to draw a real gun. If I'm drawing the Fantastic Four, I'm completely fake gun, right? If I'm drawing Nick Fury, we were talking to Steve about this the other day when we were chatting. Like when I draw a gun in the Phantom, I'm drawing like AK-47s or I have plenty of reference, right? But I'm drawing Nick Fury, you know, you would see Kirby would draw something that sort of looked like a Thompson submachine gun with a bunch of flanges on it. You know, a bunch of doodads stuck on it. Each one is a different challenge. Sometimes having to draw something that's very accurate, like a flintlock, is a challenge. And I sort of feel like a challenge as an artist is good because it forces you to raise the bar. I think if you make up stuff all the time, it can be fun, but then I think, and then maybe this just depends upon the artist. I like being able to do both. I don't particularly love drawing guns because they're very difficult. You know, they're very complex. Like if you're drawing a Mauser, or you're drawing a Heckler and Koch. You got to have them from both sides. You got to try to find them from different angles. I actually have. Where is it now? I actually have.
You pull out a gun, Mike.
Yeah, don't get us demonetized.
Phantom's gun. So I actually bought a replica of his gun, so I can pose with my hand. I can. And it's great because you can take the clip out, because there's several times during the strip where I had to draw him ejecting the clip. And I'm like, well, I know what a 45 looks like, and I know the clip comes out. So I'd have to go on YouTube and find a video of a guy like
clearing a chamber.
Right, yeah. So it's easy for Tony to write, the Phantom clears the chamber, blah, 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 blah. Then I've got to go find for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Williamson had lots of guns, lots of prop guns, lots of prop handguns. And in fact, it used to be a lot more easy to find realistic prop guns back in the old days. And now it's much harder to find them because of, kids would go get a gun, and then the police would see them with a gun, and then they would shoot the kid,
Do you know any cartoonists who have switched over to those airsoft weapons? Like one of my buddies who's in the military, like they really enjoy these airsoft. They're basically like almost like replica real weapons, but they shoot pellets or something like that.
I don't know.
Mm.
Oh, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some people do. I mean, most people who draw stuff for Marvel and DC, most guys in my generation probably have a few prop guns.
Yeah.
Because you were drawing guns. So yeah. I mean, I like the challenge. Like I said, I like the challenge of both. This week, like this particular story, which is going on very long, I had to draw all kinds of military vehicles, jeeps and all kinds of like troop transports, and so I actually have to spend quite a bit of time. You may find one and go, I like that. What is it? What kind of vehicle is it? And then you have to find out the kind of vehicle it is. And then, all right, because like they're in Africa. So they're not going to have U.S. stuff. They're not going to have U.S. They're going to probably have Russian, Chinese vehicles. A lot of the African countries, right? So one of the things I would do is I would say, okay, what are the troop transport Zimbabwe, troop transport South Africa, and then I find South Africa makes their own, and so you'd find the vehicle, then you try to find different angles of it. One of them I found, I was lucky, I found one. There were videos of it, so you could see videos of it driving and doing different things in different angles. So I was actually able to screen capture.
Oh, wow.
The thing from different angles. So you have to put a lot of time into. I mean, that might be an afternoon, right? Just finding my reference, right? Not actually drawing anything. Just going like, I've got to draw a prison. I've got to draw troop transports. I've got to draw military people in, like Rhodesia, or something that's sort of similar to Rhodesia, like a fascist country. And so you spend a lot of time looking up military uniforms.
I could only wonder what your search history looks like.
I know for a while, because of what I would research, I'm sure the AI was just going crazy, because you're looking at weapons. What is this guy, terrorist? Oh, okay, we'll put him on the terrorist. Or he's a gun nut. He's looking up guns.
He's on a no-fly list. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But luckily, there are people who are super aficionados of all this military stuff, right? Just like there's people who love trains or World War I military stuff. So if you can come across some website that'll help. It maybe it's just part of the job. You know, it's a lot easier if you're drawing a Marvel comic because you can make up stuff.
Yeah. Somebody, Eternity Forever said something about Liefeld guns. Like if you want to draw a toaster with a pistol grip, go for it.
Right.
Go in.
Yeah. Yeah. Steranko was not looking.
Yeah, I love this. Steranko had it was like a hair dryer with a grip.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Get those armaments at Sally's.
Those Sally's Beauty Supply guns, right?
I mean, that's one of the things about drawing Star Wars that people don't probably really think about. But Star Wars is very complicated. Mm-hmm. And so when you're drawing something and you have, Luke Skywalker's lightsaber versus Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber versus, an X-Wing or whatever, that stuff is really labor intensive to draw because it's just complicated.
But Mike, when Al was doing the Star Wars comics, I always remember, I didn't read a lot of the Star Wars stuff when it was out, but I always remember I thought that the lightsaber, like the saber glow, seemed really thin to me. And I wonder, was that some sort of stylistic choice? It's I guess that's how I'm sure you guys called it laser sword, you weren't really being on model with how things were being referenced. Visually, how did that kind of, it's going to be a really thin light, or did it not matter?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about Al doing Star Wars is that his work was a big influence on Lucas in the beginning, because Lucas loved Al's Flash Gordon comics and his EC work and stuff like that. So it was his aesthetic, I think, that he brought that Flash Gordon aesthetic, which was the original inspiration for Star Wars, right? Like if you look at Bespin, the Cloud City of Bespin, that's the Hawkman's floating city, right? I mean, it's completely with the Art Deco style and the whole 9 yards, right? And he brought that aesthetic to it, which was more classical, I would say, or in the lineage of Raymond, back to Raymond and Foster and the comic strip. He brought that forward because that was contemporary to him, right? Where now people drawing it are much more techie.
Right, they're referencing a different.
They're not referencing what was the original, right? They're not referencing. Like I remember one of the comics that really impressed me was when Michael Golden drew that issue of Star Wars, and the way he drew the laser beams and all the stuff. You felt like, okay, it was cartoony and kind of weird in places, but it also felt more modern and techie, as opposed to somebody like Carmen Infantino drawing it, where she's just like, here's a triangle with a bunch of bullshit on it, it's just kind of like
that's a Star Destroyer, yeah, it's a triangle with bullshit on it.
Yeah. And I think it was like it's that era of, I mean, Al was like a fan of it, so he brought that whole aesthetic to it. But you could tell there was other guys of that generation or the next generation. When they drew it, they weren't getting what was cool about it, so they were just like, Darth Vader kind of looked funky, and the characters are kind of weird looking, or whatever, Yeah. So that thin line, he didn't draw it like, well, everybody now draws it like a hard line around it, and then they in the computer, they colored a different color. Al he wasn't doing computer coloring. I mean, he was still doing everything was still newsprint.
Yeah, I remember it kind of had like the curvy crackle around it to a degree.
Yeah, and it was just also how he wanted to interpret that, because he's also bringing in, Joseph Clement Cole and all these classic pen and ink illustrators. He's bringing this whole other world that has nothing to do with the modern stuff.
Well, I think that's interesting, thinking about kind of like there's so now. It's funny, like Star Wars and some of these kind of franchises are so far. They're so broad now. Like, how many hands have touched it, how it's influenced other generations of artists who are now doing the stuff, and it's interesting to see kind of like this callback to Ralph McQuarrie stuff, designs coming up now, which I think is it's almost like a retro throwback to the original stuff, which makes it even feel fresher. But yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said about being born into the thing that you're drawing now. Like I can't say almost, a lot of modern comic book artists grew up reading this stuff in a different way than even you might start it. You know what I mean? Like, we've had a guest on here all the time. It's like, oh, so tell us about your first books. Oh, I love Wildcats. You know what I mean? And you might crinkle your nose like, holy shit, I've been reading comic books for a lot longer than that. But that's somebody's starting point. I love like Cyberforce. I draw all my dudes with 4 arms. You know what I mean? Like that's your on ramp into illustration.
Or if you were doing anime, you were looking at anime.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're doing Star Wars. You're bringing a completely different aesthetic. That's completely, like I said, Al goes right back to the root of everything, right? The root, of, in fact, there was a Facebook group for Alex Raymond, and they post frames and panels and pages. And when you're looking at that, I see stuff, I go like, this drawing of Flash Gordon running is so influential. It has gone through generations of people. This image of that image, classic image of Flash and Ming the Merciless sword fighting.
Yep.
Which of course was influenced by Errol Flynn. Right, or whatever. Yeah. So now I know that. Some 12-year-old doesn't know that. They're just saying that. When I'm looking at that image, I'm going like, how many echoes of that one image? I mean, that's Luke and Darth Vader fighting. That's Obi-Wan and Darth Vader fighting. It all goes back to that. So, Al was of the generation growing up in the 30s that he was seeing that stuff as it was coming out. So it had never existed before, right? Until those guys drew those Sunday pages, right? That imagery had never existed in that way before. So he was growing up absorbing that. And then 40 years later, he's drawing something that's directly influenced by those things that he saw as a kid. Right?
I have a really spicy question, fellas. So, all right. One thing I love about this whole project is that we can take generational knowledge of cartooning and illustration and art and design and all of that stuff and dump it into this room, and we get to mix it up because Mike's from a different generation that Steve and I are from. There are people in the chat. There's superstars that always hang out in pencil to pencil who have a different on-ramp, right? And, there's even kids now who, they grew up, the first movie they saw was like Iron Man. How crazy is that? I'm just,
the first movie they saw was The Last Avengers.
Right. I mean, that's a real thing. And as we get
Is it Coogler? Wasn't he like he was like 10 when Iron Man came out or something like that?
Ryan Coogler? That
Yeah.
can't be right.
He was really young. He was really young when
That can't be right. But I mean,
but it was a formative movie for him. You know, like,
right. Into your point, Steve. I think. Well, what my question was going to be was, is it still fair of us? And maybe this might be more to Mike. Is it still fair of us to expect a young artist to go all the way back to the beginning of the line to understand this stuff? Like, I just saw a really interesting conversation where one of our buddies on Facebook was really studying Tezuka for the first time. And then he's like, holy shit, this is like the scrolls. It's all right here. Tezuka figured it all out, and we're still trying to unravel what Tezuka was doing. He's the godfather of manga. Yes, that's true. Like, he halfway created all this shit. But his, like, his action, everything is so clear. It makes perfect sense to a kid. As an adult, I understand the mechanics of it. Do we still expect a young artist to do that much homework? Because I know about Winsor McKay. I know about the Yellow Kid. I know about all that stuff. Do we expect
Was
somebody?
it homework for you? Was it homework for you?
Because I wanted to be a student of it, yes. But I think, generations, ahead of me now or behind me, for however that works, I don't know if they want to dig that deep or even if we should expect it.
Well, first of all, I don't think it has any. I don't believe that you should expect it. The fact is that most people
or respect it. Maybe that's even a thing. I think you respect it if they do.
I think that if you're serious about it, you're serious about your craft, right? You will search these things out on your own eventually because you want, just like we did, right? Nobody told me I had to go look at old stuff. I just naturally went and looked at old stuff, right? And there's going to be some artists that are not interested in going back and looking. You could give a fuck about Tezuka or Mobius or Jack Kirby, and they just want to do stuff that looks like whatever. All right. But I really think that if you're really interested in art, you're really passionate about art, I don't see how you can sort of
like dismiss it, right?
Yeah, I just think it's sort of natural. I don't think it's home. I don't think it's homework. It's like, as a teacher, I'm always, I feel one of my chief things as a teacher is to illuminate the past that maybe a student doesn't know, right? Like one year I had a student that was drawing war stuff. He was drawing tanks and soldiers. And I showed him, Russ Heath and John Severin and Joe Kubert. And it just like blew this like 14-year-old kid's mind. He'd never seen.
Right.
So Jack Davis. Yeah.
Right, he'd never seen any of that stuff, never seen any of the EC stuff, right? My job, I felt as a teacher, is to say, here's the stuff if you're interested. If you're not, and next week you're going to like Cars or something, then it doesn't really matter. But I really can't imagine, and I don't really know any artists who are serious about their craft, whether they love Tezuka or Alex Raymond or any old cartoonist. They at least looked at it. They were at least sort of aware of it. Whether you love it or not, it has a lot to do with taste. Like, I don't like Mexican food, or I only like Mexican food. You know what I mean? And when you're young, you tend to like eat from the same
trough
all the time. But I really feel like one of the main things I do as a teacher is expose the student to all these other artists that if you're interested in this, how about this? You're interested in design, look at Muka, right? I remember doing that. One girl was doing like these rock posters.
Mm-hmm.
right? And I said, well, you know what that stuff is referencing is these older artists, Art Nouveau. She never heard of Art Nouveau.
Right.
So
I have all their albums.
Exactly. You know, I don't feel that it's I don't feel that it's homework, but I will say, as a teacher who's given people homework, like, I want you to come in next week and tell me 10 artists that you like. I can't tell you how many times, as a teacher, as a college teacher, right? You're teaching students, and they say, I want to be an animator. And I say, well, name 10 animators. Matt Groening, he's not an animator, right? And so I sort of feel like you can't be like so shallow in your knowledge of your craft that you want to be part of and expect to really sort of get in you. Every once in a while, right? There's like a Rob Liefeld. There's a person who shoots to fame, and everybody always uses that person like, well, they didn't know anatomy, they didn't know this, they didn't, the students always will point out to that person as that's the exception. And
you're right.
Yeah, and I would say, well, if you were going to be that person, you would already be that person now. You would not be here, right? So
right, and I'll throw a life preserver in the water for Rob, because I think he's always gets cut down, but he got somewhere for a reason. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that shows that there's also other ways that you can be an interesting storyteller. Steve, it seemed like you were going to say something to this. Were you going to add to this?
In as much as when a lot of every artist is growing up in the environment that they've got the environment. I think about food deserts a lot. That you can only eat what's around you. So they're only fed what they've got, and so they don't know, their palates can't include things outside of their range, outside the reach. And so some of my closest friends were people like, we bonded over esoteric artists. Wally Wood was someone who, I guess, someone my age was not supposed to know about. You know what I mean? Because it was a previous generation. He died when I was 10. But that formed some bonds with other creators because we spoke a different language. We had that secret. And I think if you look at these old artists as being like, lost magic that you can discover, or a purer form of the thing you're looking at, it's drawing its power from Hal Foster. And if you don't know who Hal Foster is, once you learn it, once you realize it's like etymology, where you're like, oh, that's the source of, that's why they're speaking like that visually, because of that. The derivation is in this lineage, and you get all this other power from learning about artists. It's like, it really feels like leveling up sometimes when you discover somebody who you've never seen before, and
especially in cartooning, because cartooning, you can really trace cartooning back over the past 100+ years to literally a handful of people who started drawing stuff that then influenced literally hundreds, if not thousands, of other people, right? I mean, you can go back to Hal Foster drawing Tarzan as really like the first adventure strip, and Kniff and Sickles, and then when Foster started doing the Prince Valiant, and how that just kept going. Whether you want to pay attention to it or you want to like it or not, it's like these guys created this language, this visual language and storytelling as comic books that had not existed before, and then literally influenced thousands of other artists.
Right. And then there's the other stuff like Urasawa with manga stuff. Like, again, I was not a huge manga fan, but I find Urasawa and so I'm like, oh my God, mind blowing. Or Yves Chaland, French comics. Again, you see stuff that evolutionarily came from a completely different genetic pool than the American comics I'm looking at.
Right.
And it changes. It's amazing. And the comic strip artists. I know we talk about that, Jamar, all the time. Like, add a little bit of Richard Thompson to your work, and it's going to be like crazy how it can affect the flavor.
with some Burke-breathed shoelaces on that.
Heck yes. Heck
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things I would talk about in class is how manga is influenced by the American comic strip, right? And you're seeing the influence of the Cats and Jammer Kids and all these great early American comic strips, but it's projected through their cultural lens. But those guys are reading Disney comics. They were looking at Fleischer cartoons and Disney cartoons. So you may not like Donald Duck,
Right.
but if you like One Piece, you're getting language that was invented by artists over 100 years ago that was influenced this guy and influenced another guy and influenced another guy. And, you know, like just the way they draw squiggles and all the excitement lines. And I mean, there's so much language in comics
Yeah.
Mhm.
that you absorb, whether you want to, you know, the origin of it. But like you're right, if you look at the European guys, they are influenced by the comic strips. They weren't influenced by the comic books, they were influenced by the comic strip. So Hergé and all those people were influenced by the comic strips because the American comic strips were popular all over the world. You know, Blondie in what point was like in 2,000 papers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it had a movie, had movies. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So
I'm sorry, Mike.
no. I just like I said, I feel one of the things I do is I point that out. So if you're interested in Sirius as an artist and you want to pursue it, then you can say, okay, now I kind of have an idea of like, oh, I like this. I can find out a little bit more about this, right? You may like Wally Wood and never really like Hal Foster, but at least you know that a lot of what a Wally Wood got came from.
It was directly traced.
Yes,
Hal Foster.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just always found that stuff to be fascinating myself as an artist. It was like, and like I said, I know as a college teacher, you give people homework, like come in and tell me 10 artists.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't tell me 10 artists, I kind of really question your commitment. You know what I mean? Because it's like, if you say you really like music, you can't name 10 musicians.
Well, see, that's what I wanted to dig into right there. This is the kernel, because we all know that youth is wasted on the young. That's just fact. This is how it is. And we've all been in places where you've talked to young people and they're like, ew, but that's in black and white. That's old. I'm not interested in that. Why is it in color? No thanks. And there's lots of very quick cutoffs that aesthetically just don't appeal to them, where, you know, I've been in rooms, Mike, where I've seen you break down an episode of Gunsmoke for somebody on a perfect storytelling or composition of a shot is in an episode of Gunsmoke. And people are like, what? But why is it in color? You know, we're dealing with those kind of deficiencies in people these days. And yes, it's true. If you're a student, if you really want this, you probably have a better, a better flow into the past, and you want to know about that stuff. I had this thought about a lot of young people that I've dealt with in the past 15, 20 years who grew up on Dragon Ball. Like,
yeah, sure.
They just know Akira Toriyama. They might not even know his name.
They probably don't know his name.
They probably don't know his name, but they know Dragon Ball. And you see a lot of really like bad cartoons on the internet with like, you know, Goku with an afro or whatever. They love that aesthetic, right? But if you said, oh, you know, Toriyama was influenced by this, maybe you should look at this. I'm not sure that line is so easy to walk back to, or they may not be interested in that.
Well, I think
kind of what I'm talking about.
It's they are not interested. Now, maybe they will become interested, or maybe they will never be interested. But I have a hard time thinking that anybody who is really serious and is going to devote countless hours of their lives for the 40, 50 years of a career and go like, nah, I can't look at anything beyond, you know, what I liked when I was 20.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know anybody. I mean, I know plenty of students who don't like stuff or
Right.
don't want to watch an old film, right? That was a constant thing where you would say, well, you know, you have film class, you got to watch this film, and they're like, oh, it's black and white.
But I do think it's sort of like if it's couched in the terms of, yes, this is your favorite artist. Well, it's one thing if you don't even know the artist's name. That's a whole level of separation from the process, I think. But if, let's say you find out that, okay, this is the person who's creating that thing that you love, and it turns out, then you put and say, now this is their favorite artist.
Yeah,
I feel like that's where you realize, okay, oh, that's Sensei's sensei.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel like you can move, you know, suddenly, oh, okay, now we're talking about the grandmaster, and like, oh, I can look at their moves,
Right.
and that's a whole, again, I think people will be interested in that, and that's framing.
Yeah, I like the way you said that, Steve. I think this has been a very interesting conversation, guys. We're going to start wrapping it up, but I have a couple more questions. Our good buddy Tim Fielder just asked a really magnificent question, and this is for Steve. Steve, a practical question. As this is Tim speaking. As I'm now fully engaged in producing books 2 and 3 in my series, I'm looking to serialize the already out book 1 on Webtoons Canvas. My questions are: is Webtoons viable towards building your market, and does the style of the work matter so much on Webtoons? It's a good question.
Is it viable towards building a market? Yes and no. You can build an audience. I don't know about a market. The interesting thing about it is their audience is international. So in terms of being able to capitalize on that market, it can be a challenge if you have 10,000 readers or 50,000 readers on Webtoons and they're separated all over the world. It can be more challenging to find a way to market them. So the word markets may be changing my thought on that first part. And also, it's a very young audience. So I always think about the ickiness of marketing to a young audience. You know, they're reading comics for free, and there's something about trying to sell to them. But in terms of building an audience, Webtoons absolutely is a thing. So I know people who read my webcomic there and then will buy the book. They'll want the collection, the high-res Blu-ray edition, which is how I think about the books. I also like the idea that, the idea of a free book 1 is free if you want to get book 2, that's available for purchase. It also, the building of an audience there is key to having new material come out. If you stop producing new material, your momentum will slow and then stop, because if you're in the canvas section of Webtoons, if you're not updating, you're buried. Basically, there's a flood of material coming in, and if you're not in that flow of new material, you won't get new eyeballs. The style matters. There's definitely an aesthetic that's clear if you look at Webtoons, but I'd say style doesn't matter, because my style is nobody's style. People think, is that European? What are you going for with that?
Right.
And still, I found an audience there. And again, Lore Olympus, the biggest thing on Webtoons, looks nothing like what people would say would be the popular style on Webtoons. So I think if it's consistent and good, it can rise above. So I'd say, perfect. Yeah. Lore Olympus, the idea that it's reaching out beyond Webtoons, and it's the first webcomic really that's, I don't know if I know a lot of comic strips were distributed early in the early web, but I think that's one's really huge for everybody.
Would you say that it has a lot more to do with people liking the story than liking the style?
I think it's a style that doesn't offend people. I think if it's welcoming, and I think it's a case of like the style suiting the genre. You look at that style, and when people look at the art, that's sort of a promise to what the story will be about. It's like Eddie Campbell's perfect for From Hell. Dave Gibbons is perfect for Watchmen. If you switch those guys, do the projects work anymore? Do they make different promises about what the story is? I think Rachel Smythe and Smithy, I don't know how she says.
I think it's Smythe, yeah.
That artwork promises something and it delivers. So I think that's it. And I think that's where my for what it's worth, my comic promises something, and I think it delivers.
I love this podcast.
So do you think if you were drawing the middle age in a quote unquote manga style, you would get different traction?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I bet I would. I think there's a certain amount of there is a bias that people have towards style. I often think about art style working like similar to genre, where or like you were saying, I like Mexican food, I don't like, but if someone says I want Italian food, they don't expect it to be gnocchi. They don't expect it to be potato balls. It's like, yeah, that's extremely Italian. It's our restaurant. It's our Italian restaurant, so there's nothing but gnocchis and biscotti.
Right.
People would be disappointed because they have an expectation, and I think art is also that sort of sets up expectations, and at that point it becomes an expectations game. And I think if someone looks at manga, I think a lot of people we know a lot of people who say I don't read manga, and they react the way I don't listen to country.
Right.
They don't give it or bluegrass. They don't give it a chance because of just the most outer shell aesthetic.
Yeah, that's a good point, Steve. Anything else to add to that, Mike?
You need to listen to some bluegrass, boy.
We introduced a new character before the end of the episode. That's fantastic. Oh my goodness! But yeah, I think what really makes all of this pop right now is kind of like calling back to the beginning of all of this. I think our conversation about like what is the DNA of a cartoonist, basically, like what there's so many parts that are moving around in us that just kind of informs how we work or what our personal aesthetic is. Steve loves stuff that I don't like. I love stuff that Mike is like, what? It all kind of works for us, but we all can reference the past, and that's one of my favorite parts.
Well, I think the one thing about going back to the past is you realize how everybody had much more of a common audience. I was talking about this in regards to the demise of something like Mad Magazine. Mm-hmm. Heyday of Mad Magazine, right? Everybody read Mad Magazine, right? Adults read it, kids read it, and now a common audience, the only thing you really have left for common audiences to some degree is movies and Netflix or something, right? Because the environment for print is so small compared to what it was 50 years ago, in the 1970s, right? Mm-hmm. And so, in the 1970s, how many 9 to 20-year-olds read Mad Magazine? Millions. They sold millions of copies of Mad Magazine, right? You don't sell 1 million copies of any magazine now, right? And you certainly don't sell 1 million copies of anything that 9 to 20-year-olds would read, right? What is there left that would have that many people look at it besides movies or video games, maybe,
Well, Tim says, wouldn't you say that Webtoons has that sort of size as an audience? Maybe Steve could speak to that, because there are a lot of people reading Webtoons.
Oh yeah, Lauren Olympus has millions of subscribers.
What is magazine?
Yeah, it has millions of subscribers. I mean, they have millions of users. I mean, it's enormous. I mean, that's how someone's like, oh wow, you got 15,000 subscribers on Webtoons. I'm like, yeah, that's Lauren Olympus gains that on any given Tuesday, so they can lose that many and wouldn't notice it.
Right, but it's also about whether we're sort of facing this right now with what Instagram is doing and everything. Let's say you've got 100,000 followers. Can you get 2% of those people to give you $1? Right? You can have a lot of people follow you, but it's easy to follow something on the internet. Are they going to really invest in you? If you went away tomorrow, are they going to like, hey, Steve, where's my...
Well, it is challenging because I know there's some very popular series on Webtoons Canvas and in Webtoons originals, and they don't have, and they have a Patreon, but let's just say it's not a bustling Patreon page. And you'd think with 100,000 subscribers, your Patreon would be going through the roof. But it's similar to a lot of people, other cartoonists who have really popular Instagrams, and it doesn't necessarily, get converted in any way. Because again, they're reading something. They have a fire hose of content coming at them. They don't have to pay for anything. They have an unlimited buffet. Why would they ever leave that to go buy a little snack from you over on your cart? So it's challenging. It's challenging that, but I do think those audiences will grow up, and a fraction of them will become lifelong readers and lifelong fans. And, a subset of those will become super fans. A subset of those will become Patreon supporters.
What percentage of, if you know this, what percentage of people on your Patreon are also fellow creatives, artists, budding creatives?
Not many. I think everyone nowadays is an aspiring creator of one stripe or another. I occasionally get questions like that. I would bet of the 150 Patreon supporters, I'd say maybe 10. In some cases, I think I know there's another cartoonist. We both give each other $1 every month. So I know we're really both just giving Patreon 40 cents a month.
We just pass the same dollar in the room back around.
But other than that, I don't. And that's a bad. That's like people in Artist Alley buying each other's books and asking if you had a good show. I don't know about that, but
and then leaving it under the table when you go.
Mike's not putting it in his backpack. He's just gonna leave it on the table, leave it on top of the urinal, right? This has been a really interesting conversation, and this is just an aperitif, you guys, of what you get every week. About a before dinner drink, an aperitif. Not only am I handsome, I know stuff. Isn't that amazing? That you'll get every week when you tune into Pencil to Pencil. Guys, we had a fantastic time tonight. This is just the co-host just kicking the ball around, just chopping it up, as they say in the streets. But we also have special guests from time to time. I was talking to John Gallagher, and I think we may have him on next week. I have to close the deal, but I think we might have John on. And if there are people that you'd love to see us talk to on the show, I'd love to hear what you think. Can't say we're going to get them because they may not respond to my emails, but we'll try.
Your 500 emails. Just keep wearing them down.
And we still have to talk more about your Leon the Extraordinary's trip to Comic-Con.
Oh yeah.
Are you trying to make us go over? Oh
no,
man,
I'm excited to hear about that. I don't know if you were sort of like just being gracious, but we can.
And I thought you were going to have pictures because you had pictures.
Nah. We'll do it another time. I'm trying to stick to the schedule.
Okay.
But also, I love the fact that we leave people wanting. Isn't that exciting?
But most wanting.
Always wanting. But to kind of just what Tim and you guys were just speaking about, I just came back. Well, it was a week ago already. It was like a legit week ago. I came back from San Diego Comic-Con. I brought COVID home with me. It was fantastic. Well, I have to say, guys, COVID, 1 out of 10, do not recommend. Do not recommend COVID. I'll just let you know that. I had a fantastic kind of like coming out party for Leon Extraordinary at Scholastic Graphics. Scholastic had a giant booth. I signed a bunch of galleys or arcs for the readers and fans. It was a great time. I met or caught up with a lot of great comic book artists and book authors. Some people I knew, some people we knew just from the internets, and it was a really fantastic thing. And the funniest thing about this, you guys, is when you go to things like San Diego, people always ask questions like, "Is this your first time?" Like it's almost like going to Disney. Is this your first time? Tell me it's your first time. And I said this to people. I said, well, actually, the last time I was here was 20 years ago. Do you believe that, Mike?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was 2002 was the last time I went to San Diego Comic-Con. And so this person says to me, you ready for this? 20 years. Well, what have you been doing since then? Which says something.
You're like sitting over decommissioned in the box, like a robot with like no power,
like cobweb line, like running off of my forehead. And what I think is really interesting about the power of San Diego Comic-Con is, and this is why I started going originally when I was first breaking into comics, is a little birdie told me that if you want to be legit, you got to go to Comic-Con. Now, I think that that schism has changed a little bit over the past 25 years, but it's still important in its own way. Even if it's just you need to have your face out there, be there to be seen, all that stuff I think really does apply, even on an industry level. Because I talked to even our buddies Art and Franco, who were on the podcast a couple of years ago, said in very clear terms, we go to San Diego every year to do business. We line up business for the next year at San Diego. Yeah, that's
people, I know some people still do that. I also know that some people feel like you don't do that as much anymore because a lot of the companies don't come in the way that they did. The comic book companies, because everybody used to have booths and they would wine and dine people, and I don't think that I don't know what their business is, but the business, like I used to go to Baltimore, let's say every year, and usually out of that I would get a job.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say now, I haven't been in a little bit, but that doesn't happen as much because the business is not that way anymore. You know what I mean? The companies are not that way anymore. So maybe you find business
elsewhere.
But it's more like you're generating your own.
Yeah.
Like an editor's not going to come by my table like they used to and say, "Hey, you want to draw whatever?" Because the editors are not there in that capacity.
Right. Well, I will say that, and to that guy's very weird question that he asked me, I thought, well, you know what? I didn't say this. I kind of just turned my back to him and left the area. Got a fresh one. Is I think New York Comic Con filled that San Diego gap very nicely. Was when New York Comic Con started to really pick up buzz. People were like, I don't need to go to San Diego now.
Right. And San Diego's so expensive.
Right. That whole thing is a survivalist episode. Like you have to basically survive San Diego. And even the reports I just read about how it's back, it's smaller than it used to be, but maybe it should be this small. Like I think I think size of San Diego was probably like New York has been.
Well, the other thing is that it seems like they're not. They are announcing some things like the Rock was there with this thing, but they're not. The movie companies are not going there as much as they were. Of course, in the aughts, when the movie companies started coming, they're like, "Screw you, comic guys! You can be at all the way to the ass end of the universe." It's like it wasn't about comic. Comic-Con still used comic in the word.
Right.
It was really about everything else. And then like, oh, yeah, there's some guys over there that draw something, but I'm not really.
Right.
Really, people really felt like, wow, the original, the goats, as they would say, were not really getting the love as much. It was all about like Twilight. But the last time I went 3 years ago, and then the time before that I went, it was Twilight, and you had all the moms and the girls like camping out for days so they could
Hall H, yeah,
it's
real.
Wow,
yeah. There were people in tents back all the way up past the marina, waiting to get in the Hall H. And I was just like a dummy. Like I was meeting somebody for lunch, and I went around the back of this building. I haven't been there 20 years. Some things are different. I don't remember everything, but I can use my phone now, which my phone didn't do that back in 2002. And I'm like doing the Egon walk with the thing, trying to figure out where the ghosts are. And I'm like, what's up? what's going on with all these people? And I was like, oh shit, it's Hall H. They were wrapped around the building to go see whoever was there, to see Kevin Feige. It's a real thing. Well, I'll leave with this because Tim made a really interesting point. Tim said, no doubt, because I saw Tim, shout out to my man Tim Fielder. I saw Tim in the building. He gave me love at San Diego. He said, no doubt, my career seems to have altered after San Diego. Lots of under the hood business, pretty crazy. That is the power of San Diego Comic-Con. That's real shit. And it has changed, and people are there to see, I don't know, Kingsman 6 or whatever, but there's still business being had.
Good question. You didn't have a home base. You didn't have a table, right?
No.
Sure.
No.
And did Tim? I don't know if
I don't think no. I think Tim had book publishing business.
Gotcha.
Like I don't want to speak for him, but he has. Like,
so not, going there and not necessarily setting up, which adds thousands of dollars to the cost.
Oh yeah, and I can't even imagine. It was expensive 15 years ago when I did it. I can't even imagine what it would be now.
Yeah, I think I last went in 2017. I think my thing is if someone's not flying me out or if I'm not up for an Eisner, I'm not going.
That's real, but it even to me, no, I wasn't set up. Like I was there on Scholastic Business. I had programming. I had signings. I had panels. I had a game show. I had all these really cool things. There was a trade event that I was a part of. It was really cool. But there's still Artist Alley. Artist Alley felt very depressing to me. I don't remember Artist Alley being so compact. It was tight back there. But then there's still like small press areas, and we saw some of our buddies who were like peppered through the convention hall doing their thing, selling their wares.
Yeah, because they're basically a lot of people go because if they can break even, they get to keep their spot. Because if you lose your spot,
it's like rent control. Right?
You may not ever be able to exhibit there again. You may not be able to, because then you're on like a waiting list.
Yeah,
that's great.
But no, it's still important. I mean, as much as everybody likes to crow about, people are just there to see, Winter Soldier previews or whatever, there's still business being had. So,
I'm there just for the Lego.
I'm there for the sideshow collectibles.
Right. What was it? You were showing me pictures of the Funko Pop. I mean, I don't really get the Funko Pop thing, but it's like, it was huge. It was like, half the convention hall looked like it was Funko Pop.
Yeah, the back hall, Funko does a really big. I can't even call it like a display. They had a city in the back of the back end of the convention hall. I think they called it Funko Town. Take me down to Funko Town. and there were stores. There were like storefronts, and then there was a big
diner. It was like a diner
and people wait there the whole time. They love it. They love it. And I know that's something not everybody's into or gets, but it's real, and they do real business.
Yeah, I guess they never got the Funko.
Yeah,
like Beanie Babies, or whatever.
But though, you know what? I even put it like this was like old J.J. Abrams when I was really into him and his storytelling. This was like during Lost when everybody's like J.J. Abrams, J.J. Abrams. And I think it was a Forbes magazine or something, but he wrote this essay about the question mark box. It was like you have to create something, like almost like those blind boxes that were popular in conventions for a while. You would just go, "Oh, give me that one. It's $50." And then you open it up, and there's like bullshit in it. But you were so excited just for the opportunity to look in this thing. Like, right. Are you creating that kind of excitement with whatever you're doing? And almost doesn't matter what's in the box. You know what I'm saying? And
Al Capone's vault. You open it up, and there's nothing inside.
But you were excited up until that time. It's like, oh, maybe next time. But I think that's the appeal of these like companies that sell little plastic things. It's just like, oh, the next one's coming out. Oh, the Hasbro had a giant thing going on over there. The G.I. Joe fandom is crazy right now. I'm kind of low key into that. They're selling. Hold up, we got to get out of here. Hasbro has their own, almost like a crowdfunding thing.
Yeah.
And they're selling a G.I. Joe His Tank. It's $300 right off the top. And they've pre-sold like a cajillion of them. And people are like $300. People want it. It's the question mark. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, Kenner did the same thing, didn't they? With like what was it, Jabba's Barge or something like that? I think they started it or something. Yeah.
Thanks Eternity for that. You saved that. Right, yeah. But I'm just kind of getting to the thing where like it almost doesn't matter what it is. It could be a Furby, it could be a Stretch Armstrong, it could be,
Furby. Oh, I'm totally all over Furby.
It could be a pair of Yeezys. It doesn't matter. People want the stuff they want.
It could be Elf.
It could be Elf. Here's my last thing. We're gonna get out of here. This is important to no one. I'm a big video game guy. One of the most expensive retro video games is Alf for the Sega Master System. That came out like 1988.
Does that thing still even work now? Is it all like corroded?
If you can find that game in the wild, it's worth like $700.
Wow.
All right.
Right. So, all right, people will start to scratch at J.J. Abrams in the chat. But let's wrap this up, guys. This was fantastic. Hopefully, we'll have John Gallagher on next week. If not, we'll have something else going on, or it might just be us three just kicking it. I think that's worth the price of admission, don't you think?
No refund.
No refunds. No takes back.
No bills.
So, guys, I'm gonna pull the pin. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. JRT said actual Alf is See, tell him, George. Yo, beware. What was it? Beware of Toddler. George Gant is a fantastic comic strip. Please go check that out. George is making stuff happen.
Yeah.
Go support. Look at all these superstars up in our chat.
That's fantastic,
guys. For Mike Manley, Steve Conley, I'm JAMAR Nicholas. It's time to pay those bills, and don't get the monkeypox out there, you guys. You gotta wash those Kirby hands. Let's take it home. Good night, you guys. See you tomorrow for coffee break. Woohoo!